as you know, it's summer, and since it's summer, of course, Philadelphia is getting in touch with its citizens to help prepare them for another hot summer, and that means that there is once again a ban on dumpster pools.
What? Hold on. You can't just leave that there.
You don't have dumpster pools in Los Angeles?
No, we have pools in Los Angeles. What is a dumpster pool? Well, I think I can imagine what a dumpster pool is. And oh, Brad, the level of E. coli. Oh God.
Oh, how little you know about dumpster pools. This very industrious Philadelphian wanted a pool, but of course didn't have a yard to put it in or a place to put it in, and didn't have the money to have a pool. So he figured out a great solution. He rented a dumpster for $250, power washed it. He did power washed it, then lined it with tarp, and then filled it with water, and he had a dumpster pool. Now, of course, there was no safety around it. You had to there was no ladder. You had to climb up to get into it. And not for nothing, how do you fill a dumpster with a few thousand gallons of water? Well, you open up the fire hydrant with that illegal tool that you have.
Oh, God.
and filled it up with fire hydrant water. And but on the plus side, dumpster pool.
I have so many questions. Okay, so once this first guy did it, and I think we can all agree that all you need to do is power wash a dumpster and then it's perfectly clean.
He power washed it. What more do you want?
What do you want? What do you want, Mr. Bourgeoisie? All right, so he power washed it. My other question is, did other people follow this dude's lead? Like, were there multiple entrepreneurs?
Well, yes, that's why Philadelphia had to put out a law banning them, because once somebody saw what he had done, everybody was like, this is brilliant, and they started having dumpster pool parties.
Oh my God, can I just say, Philadelphia, never change.
Yeah.
Keep living your best life, Philadelphia. Philadelphia, by the way, the same city that threw batteries at Santa Claus, right? Am I right in thinking about this?
But now listen, that was a long time ago. We've progressed since then. I'm sure now, if we were to do that, they would be those, lithium batteries that are a lot more lightweight and aerodynamic.
Much less damage with the lithium batteries.
Yeah.
So Philadelphia moving up in the world. So a dumpster pool, you rent it for a couple of days, and then how do you empty out a dumpster pool? There's no natural way aside from tilting it over. Oh, I guess you could do
They've got
reverse suction.
Almost like the opposite of a dump truck. One of the doors just drops down, and then you just point it towards the part of the street with the sewer grate, and you flood the street for a little while until the sewer takes it all.
Oh my God, the city must hate this. This must be...
I don't know what made them more upset. The fact that maybe it's not a great idea, even though again it was lined with tarp, but maybe that's not a great idea health-wise. It's also super dangerous because there's no safety.
Zero safety.
As you know, if you've got a pool, you've got to have a fence around it and everything. So there was safety issues as well, or just the tremendous amount of water that was just being used right out of the fire hydrants and then dumped down in the sewer.
Oh my God. And also, I'm just the dad in me. I'm thinking about all the rusty, semi-treated iron and steel on those things. And just like, there's no way that somebody's kneaded and catch a splinter of rust as they're going up. It's like, well, that's it for me. I had a good run, you know.
Yeah, you need after you get out of a dumpster pool full of water, you've got to get into a dumpster pool full of tetanus shot stuff.
just a week of tetanus shots to make up for your dumpster pool. And on that note, I'm going to say hello, everybody, and welcome to Comic Lab, the dumpster pool show about making comics.
And the dumpster fire show about making a living from comics. I'm Brad Geiger, the editor of the Webcomics Handbook on Substack and the creator of Evil Inc.
And I'm his friend Dave Kellett, cartoonist of Drive and Sheldon and co-director of Stripped.
And this week's Hour of Comics Advice is made possible by your support at patreon.com/comiclab. So Dave, let's talk comics.
Let's talk comics, my friend. And you raise a good point that I think Philadelphia could fight its dumpster fires with its dumpster pools. I didn't put that together, but yes.
We could address one with the other. It could be a kind of a synergy type of thing.
Yeah, sort of a virtuous circle, if you will,
Yes.
of one fighting the other. And then at the end, everyone gets into the dumpster pool and enjoys a little bit of E. coli mixed with rust. And isn't that a nice way to start your day?
Yeah.
So, Brad, I've got a great question that's coming in from patreon.com/comiclab about survivorship bias. All right. And this is coming in from Chuck Scott over at patreon.com/comiclab. And Chuck writes, "Hi, Brad and Dave. What are your views on survivor bias in the creative community? Some successful artists honestly believe that people aren't successful because they simply didn't put in the work without acknowledging the complex machinery of creative industries." So, boy, I've got a lot of opinions on this, but I want to turn this to my friend Brad Geiger, who has, by the way, have you or have you not tried a dumpster pool?
I've not tried a dumpster pool. No.
Oh, boo, boo.
But listen, that's not because I'm like against dumpster pools. I just never get invited to all the cool parties.
Brad's never invited to the dumpster pool.
It's the same reason I never tried marijuana. My kids growing up, they're like, "Well, Dad, did you ever had to be in that situation where you had to decide whether or not to
just
to
not
do
cool
that?"
enough?
And I said, I'd love to know what I would do if somebody handed me marijuana. It has never happened. I was never invited to those parties. It never came up. They kept saying, "Just say no, just say no." I'm like, just say when the party's at.
Meanwhile, Brad's playing D&D with a party of one.
Yeah.
All right. Brad,
D&D
you
for
roll
one.
You roll a D16. All right. That's great. And then Brad moves his people.
Yeah, which is just
anyway,
D.
Yeah, just... All right. So survivorship bias, though. So let's, first of all, why don't we define for the people that might not know what survivor bias or survivorship bias is? What does that entail, Brad?
Yeah. So survivor bias is when we tend to pay more attention to the success stories and winning examples while ignoring the failures. All right. It's kind of like looking only at top athletes and forgetting about the number of people who didn't make it, but also put a lot of time into their athletic prowess. This can mess up our judgment because we're not seeing the whole picture. For example, if investing, we only focus on companies that did well, we might think that a strategy is foolproof when it's not. Right? We don't see those companies that did the same strategy and went under. And the same goes for history. If we only look at civilizations that thrived, we miss out on learning from those that didn't. So what survivorship bias talks to us about is the importance of looking at the big picture. And also from the other end, if you are one of those people that made it, you've got to take into account that there was a whole lot of things that went into your making of your goal. Only part of which might be those things that you focus on. It's right. Something I got to tell you. I have so many thoughts on survivor bias, but it's important to kind of look at that. What are we actually talking about? And what happens is a lot of times when people who succeed, they take a look at a very narrow list of things that often are self-serving, and they say,
or self-selecting.
This is why I made it.
Yeah, and so. Boy, I have a lot of thoughts like you, too, and I'm excited to talk about this because I think I have two different opinions on survivorship bias based on whether someone went the independent route, like Brad and I did, like webcomics route or Bone, the independent publishing route, or if someone went the publishing route. Because at the end of Chuck's question, they talk about, there's a myriad possibilities and impacts that could deflect you from your hoped for path. And in publishing, I think that's true. I think there is a survivorship bias in publishing because a lot of things have to align. Your editor has to like it. Your marketing team has to do a good job. The distributor has to have well-timed distribution. The individual stores have to promote it well. There's a lot of moving parts, right? But I might be a little controversial here in saying that I don't feel like as many of those things apply to an independent career as they do to a publishing career.
Yeah.
And maybe that's just my own survivorship bias talking, Brad. Do you feel similarly, or am I in the wrong there?
No, I come at this from a couple of different angles because of my own background and what I've done. But I co-sign everything that you just said. And I'll go even one step further, is in that I get really uncomfortable when you hear somebody who has made a certain degree of celebrity or fame or success, and they look at a bunch of people who are trying to do the same thing, and they say, what you've got to do is follow your dreams. If you can dream it, you can do it. And all of this kind of stuff. And you hear a lot of this advice being given. Like, for example, we talked about it on the show not so long ago when somebody says, don't write for the audience, write for yourself. And then you'll find success. You can't find. And the truth is a little bit more nuanced than that, because what happens is you hear people going, well, I've just got to believe in myself. And if I believe in myself, I'm going to succeed, because that's what this star told me. If I believe it, I can do it. And the truth of the matter is, you have to take a look at how your work is being perceived in the outside world, and you have to make adjustments based on that. And sometimes your dream might just be either unrealistic, or there might be certain, just dream it, you can do it. Takes all of that work about getting better, the stuff that we talk about on this show. Do a good comic is step one. Do a good comic. Focus on quality. Focus on quality has no place in if you can dream it, you can do it. Right?
Right.
That's why I get really, really nervous when people, and by the way, that's all survivor bias. When Steve Jobs says, well, I just had a vision. And we had to go and get that vision. If you read the biography of Steve Jobs, you'll find out that it was way different than that. And there was a guy, Wozniak, who was standing behind him doing the real work. And meanwhile, Steve Jobs is out there saying, well, dream it, you can do it. Well, bullshit. Without Wozniak, you'd be nothing. And that's when I hear people give that kind of advice, and I get really nervous, because it's really dangerous advice to give to somebody.
Yeah, I see the point you're trying to make, which is that the dream without putting in the work is the problem. Like, oh, if you dream it, you can do it. Yeah, okay, great. But you also have to work harder than, here is the thing about, I will just speak for me. And you know what? I think I'll speak for Brad's behalf, and you can remove yourself if I'm wrong. Brad and I are not the greatest cartoonists ever. We're not great cartoonists. We're really solid cartoonists. We're really good cartoonists. We're not great cartoonists. But at key points in our life, holy shit, did we put in the hours in a way that some of our peers, a lot of our peers, most of our peers didn't do. And we stuck at it, which is another thing. And I'll give you two bits of advice that my mom and Steve Martin gave me, broadly speaking. One, my mom was like, this was back in the newspaper days. She's like, listen, at some point, somebody's got to die or somebody's got to quit. You know what I mean? Like, because I was talking about how like those spots were all filled in newspapers, and there was never, it was like waiting for the music to stop and someone to go fall off a chair. Right. But someone's got to die or someone's got to quit. If you work hard, you are the one that will be ready when someone dies or someone quits to fill that slot. Right. And I always took that to heart, even in webcomics, is that there is always a spot available for someone that's working hard and putting in the time with enough time. Given enough time and repeated, consistent efforts towards quality, you will find your slot open up, right? So there's number one. And number two was Steve Martin saying, you've got to get so good that they can't ignore you. Right. And that is a matter of honing your artistic skills, honing your aesthetic, and honing your editorial eye. And the three of those things over the course of a decade will at some point make you so good that an audience writ large, not just a person, an audience writ large, can't ignore you. And they'll be like, oh yeah, I'm familiar with Brad Geiger. Oh yeah, I'm going to check out this book. Oh yeah, it's pretty good. All right, this is great. All right, I'm going to start reading Brad Geiger. Yeah. And so, it is survivorship bias, but it's also editorial eye bias, because now that I'm 25 years into this, I can sort of see what editors saw in me in the late 90s, which is he's got the chops, but he's not there yet.
Not
you know what
there
I mean?
yet.
But I can handpick, Brad, for you 5 or 6 cartoonists in their 20s and 30s that I see online right now that I'm like, they're going to still be cartooning 30 years from now. I know it. I can tell that they've got the chops if they just stick with it.
And you can do the opposite too, right? You can see certain people and say, this guy's going to be gone in 2 years.
Right. And okay, so let's talk about that because it's survivorship bias, but what I'm saying is one of the reasons why it's different for a publisher versus a self-publisher is that for a publisher, all the things have to line up and sometimes magically line up for a hit to happen in publishing, right? You can have a brilliant book that for whatever reason the marketing team ignores. They're like, nah, it's not really the one we want to push. Or the marketing team pushes it, but bookstores writ large or the distributors decide against it. Okay, well or the press doesn't really get behind it because remember, publishing is a scale game, unlike self-publishing. And so you've got to go really big in order to make a career of it, right? And so a lot of things have to line up right. And I will grant Chuck that part of the question is that survivorship bias is often true with publishing. But I think, and we can talk about all the exceptions, but I think it's less true in self-publishing, which if you just keep at it with honing your artistic eye, your aesthetic eye, your editorial eye, you will get better. You will cultivate an audience. It will not be at a mass scale of publishing, but you will make enough such that it becomes pro-am. And then over the course of another 5 to 10 years becomes pro, And I could see in my 20s and 30s, the ones that were going to give up. And I was not always right about that. First of all, I was not always right. Some people surprised me, but I could, and now at my age now, I can look downward and see the 20s and 30-year-olds that I know are going to not give up and they're going to keep at it and they're going to make a career of it. And it's just an intuitive sense. It's just an editorial eye, and you can wish that away. But there is something to developing an editorial eye that goes, that person's going to make it, that person's not going to make it. And you can see it. It's one of the reasons why I hate teaching. Brad loves teaching, but I can't. I'm not great at lying to someone when they're like, "What do you think of my work?" I can't. First of all, I hate all of that. I hate having to give an opinion on it. But sometimes I can tell.
Yeah. No, I agree. And that brings me right into my next point. And that is this. I have thoughts on this, and I want to hear what you have to say about it, because I've been giving advice in one way or another for about almost 15 years now, right? I started webcomics.com in 2010 after 10 years of being an independent comics artist. And for the sheer reason that I wanted to share some of the stuff that I'd learned and share stuff that I was learning at that time. So I'd have a place to put it all. Then there's the 2 books, How to Make Webcomics, the Webcomics Handbook, and Comic Lab and Webcomics Weekly. All of which to say, I've been giving advice from one standpoint or another for a long time. And let me tell you a little bit of something about what these people mean when they say that some people just aren't willing to do the work. Because to you, that sounds like survivorship bias. To me, I come at this from a little bit different way, a little angle. Okay. And I'm going to be really honest with you here, even though it's going to make me sound a little bit like a jerk. Okay. But let's take this, for example. After years of my struggling with humor writing and writing punchlines that just weren't landing or weren't nearly as strong as they could have been. And I can look back on those years and see that. Like I can see where I was missing. After years and years of that, I discovered one thing that really led the way to my getting better. And it all came down to this. I had to let that joke sit long enough so that I could read it cold, maybe a week later. I needed to let that shit sit so I would be in a different mindset, so I wouldn't be in the moment, so I wouldn't be in the zone, and I could read it the way my readers were saying it. And that only when I let that sit, only then could I address the flaws that were there and then rewrite that or I say, okay, that's not there yet, or maybe I'll take it in a different direction. Only when I do that could I see where I was coming up short. And so I've come up with a number of strategies that use that. And you've heard me talk about them on the show.
Right.
The one more panel strategy, just obviously letting it sit strategy, that the times that you've heard me say over and over about how writing is rewriting and rewriting and rewriting. And those are things that I feel passionately about, things that I've seen firsthand that got me to another place of writing better humor. I don't know that I've gotten there yet to where I want to be, but I know I'm doing a lot better than I was in those early days. And so I share that information. Okay. And then because we have Comic Lab backers, and because I've got people in webcomics.com and just seeing people that I know have listened to the show or read one of my books, etc., I see the stuff that they're putting out there. And I know, again, like Dave says, you can know when you've been doing it this long, you can tell by looking at it. I can tell that this stuff hasn't been edited, in that edited not for spelling, but for quality. It hasn't been rewritten. I see a lot of people posting what amounts to their first draft.
Right, yeah.
They are not willing to do the work. They are going after quantity because they think that they've got to post on social media every day because they're on that treadmill, and they're trapped in that. They're trying to get likes, and by the way, likes don't pay the bills. Right. But they're trying to get quantity. I got to post. They're posting their first draft of all these comics that are shitty because they won't do the work. And meanwhile, these are the same people who are wondering why it's Friday and they're not famous yet. And so that's one example of, and by the way, I've been seeing this for 15 years. I've been giving advice. The thing I had to learn real quick on webcomics.com is that I could give advice, but I couldn't force somebody to take advice.
Right.
And that's for two reasons, by the way. That's for two reasons. Number one, I can't live with their consequences, so I can't make their decisions. And also number two, maybe sometimes I'm wrong. Maybe sometimes I'm full of shit, or maybe this person's got a different way, and I've got to give them it's their life. I've got to give them the leeway to follow their own direction. Okay. So right. Sometimes you got to put that in there. Sometimes I'm full of shit too. But when you spend this much time saying some really lifelong things, I've seen this happen so many times. And then you see people posting their first drafts. You got to understand what people who are successful, other people who say that you're not willing to do the work, I can kind of understand where they're coming from, because there's a lot that they see that you are not doing, that you don't seem to be willing to do, that they have absolutely found great success, and they know that it's a reason that they are successful. And if you would just understand that part of it, they think they could get you to understand it.
Yeah. Yeah, I co-sign a whole bunch of that. I also want to say, too, that it's funny, as you get older, you see how so this in my sort of idealized version of the way survivorship bias is impacting independent comics. I realize I'm painting it with too rosy a picture, because in my mind's eye, what I'm imagining is sort of two similarly talented and capable cartoonists who have the same amount of time in their week. Mm-hmm. And so I want to talk, too, that separate from my idealized version of survivorship bias, I'm now old enough to know that, listen, if you go through a divorce, that's going to impact about 2 to 3 years of your output. No matter what you do, just on a human level. If you have a sick child, that's going to impact 5 to 15 years of your output. You know what I mean? Like there's shit in life that happens that you have no control over, that when it hits, mental health issues or physical issues. You throw out your back really badly after a car accident. You have mental health that you have to get worked out with you and either on a medical basis or on a therapy basis. That shit can have real world impacts on your output. And so it's not that I'm not saying that I'm not acknowledging that in terms of survivorship bias, but I'm saying in my sort of, if we're playing an even keel plane of two creators, both of whom had the same abilities, same amount of time, same limitations on their week, that I can sort of see which one is going to make it and which one's not. But that's also saying that I see a lot of friends along the way who have had one or two catastrophes, for lack of a better phrase, absolutely derailed their career. And that's real, and that happens. And also, separate from familial or health or things like that can hit you, there's also basic things in life. Like, I'm a white dude. I have never had to deal with what Keith Knight had to deal with as a cartoonist. Like, we can bring him back on the show. We can have our friend Keith explain all sorts of micro decisions that impacted his career that I never had to deal with, which is bullshit. But so you got to acknowledge that, too. It's also from a misogyny standpoint. There's a million things that women online have to put up with that I have never had to put up with and never will have to put up with. So that also impacts a career. So I don't want to wave those away. What I'm saying is sort of like, I don't want other people to develop a fatality bias, which is sort of the opposite of survivor bias, which is that, well, I didn't make it in my career, therefore no one can make it in the career. And why aren't we acknowledging that? You know, and that's not true either. A fatality bias is also not true. So the truth is somewhere in the middle. And the odd thing about doing a thing like Brad and I have done for 25 years is that you do have the ability to sort of see, it's not survivorship bias. Again, it's editorial eye, where you can say they're going to make it, they're not going to make it, they're going to make it, they have what it takes. They have the get up and go to do it. They don't seem to have the get up and go. They're willing to make changes. This person's not willing to make changes. You can see it in the way they do it. This person can course correct. This person cannot course correct. This person's taking risk. This person's not taking risk. You can see again and again and again, because it's not our first time at the fair. You know, we can see who's got the sort of myriad skill sets that it takes to make it happen. But maybe, Brad, is that survivorship bias, that I can see who has those skills, and as a survivor, quote unquote, I can see who else would be a survivor?
I don't know if it's survivor bias or whether it's the effect of really paying attention to one thing for a couple of decades, to the extent that you have a really heightened understanding of that thing.
Yeah,
right?
I actually think that's true, but I'm trying to be cognizant of the fact that we might be speaking from a place of survivorship bias in arguing that we don't have survivorship bias.
Well, I think that's one of those things like imposter syndrome, right?
Yeah.
How can I tell if I have imposter syndrome? Well, if the first thing that happens is if you ask yourself that question, chances are if you have the self-awareness, then you probably don't have imposter syndrome, right?
Right.
So how can you self-evaluate? I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know that I could say, yes, I've got survivor bias, or I could say, no, I don't have survivor bias. I don't know that I'm qualified of answering that question about me.
Yeah.
How could I possibly, right?
Yeah. And one of the reasons why Brad and I do this show is A, we love talking to each other, B, we love talking comics, but also C, there is a genuine desire on Brad and my part that if we can share something that will save you from a mistake or steer you from going down a wrong path, then in part we have paid it forward, into the people that did that for us. And so one of the things that I have in terms of survivorship bias, quote unquote, Here's an example. If I tell people repeatedly and stridently, hey, listen, I, Dave Kellett, do not think you should sign up for Webtoons. Right. And if you think you should get a lawyer to review 3 very key clauses in that contract, and they will explain to you why it will not bite you in the ass now, but it will bite you in the ass 15 years from now. Yeah. And if someone is not savvy enough to take that advice, Brad, that's not survivorship bias. That's me and my editorial eye going, they don't have the savvy to survive comics. Do you know what I mean?
Well, yeah.
They're eventually going to sign a bad contract is a way of saying it.
And they deserve the ass kicking that life is going to hand them.
Yeah. Like, I guess.
Because if you can't listen to that and say, oh, geez, maybe I ought to take that into account. Then if this thing doesn't give you an ass kicking, the next thing coming up Broad Street is.
Yes, the next thing will. It's not this. The next thing.
It's coming for you.
Yeah. And so that's why the survivorship bias is there in the sense that Brad and I now have an editorial eye and a sort of business eye that if people don't listen to us about the cross by eye rule, well, what other tiny mistakes are they making or not listening to or course correcting? Yeah. Do you know what I mean? That's a small, tiny example, but it gives you an idea of like what an editor sees in younger cartoonists. Well, if their wording is, their lettering is 40 times the line width of their paneling or their line art, those little small artistic choices are enough to let you know, like, what other artistic mistakes are they making? You know, so you develop slowly an aesthetic and an editorial eye that lets you judge, I think this person stands a pretty good chance of making it, or, oh, they're not seeing the splinter in their own eye in this moment. And you know what I mean? And so they're, and then what happens invariably is 10 years later, you check in on them, they go, oh, well, no one can make it in webcomics. Oh, you can't make it in independent comics.
Yep. No, I couldn't do it. Nobody can do it.
So is this world imperfect? Absolutely. And does any career involve a certain amount of luck and the right thing at the right time, or the right person linking you, or the right bit of word spreading from the right social media account? Absolutely. Yes. Brad and I acknowledge that happens. But the truth is, it's sort of like being constantly prepared for when something good could potentially happen, like a job opening up, or when you are putting in the work day in, day out, week in, week out, years on years, eventually something good will happen and you will get to where you want to go. And the stick-to-itiveness and the ever-increasing aesthetic eye and editorial eye will make sure that if Dave Kellett doesn't make it in year 10, I'll make it in year 15. Is that a different way of saying it, Brad? Yeah.
No, that's a perfect way of saying it. And another way of saying that is it's easy to be in the right place at the right time if you're always there.
Oh, bingo bango. Brad Geiger, everybody.
Hey, if you're listening while you work, take a minute to stand and stretch.
And while you're doing that, we're going to tell you why you should join us on Patreon.
When you do, you're going to get hours and hours of podcasts that we recorded just for backers.
And exclusive Patreon posts that go even deeper on Comic Lab topics.
And access to our exclusive Discord server, which is a thriving community of professional cartoonists.
So you can support the show you love and get tons of actionable resources for your own cartooning.
And listen, if you can't swing a pledge this month, we get it. No worries.
Yeah, listen, you can still support the show by rating us wherever you get your podcasts.
Just leave a 5-star review and a few kind words.
That, along with mentions on social media, is incredibly helpful.
Now, everybody, let's talk comics.
All right, Brad, well, mid-show update for everybody. Just a reminder, for my big birthday, I'm hoping to get to 500 patrons over at patreon.com/comiclab. And I think if I'm like checking it correctly, I think we're at 460. We are a mere 40 pals away from Dave Kellett's big birthday wish. And guys, you don't want to let this little boy not get his birthday wish. He's been such a good kid all year long. And so anyway, so Brad, tell people what they get when they join us over at patreon.com/comiclab.
Well, if we get to 500, the first thing they're going to get is 2 exclusive Drunk Comic Lab episodes, which are, if you've heard them in the past, they are some of our most fun shows. The gloves come off, the stories come out.
It's true.
And they are really a lot of fun. And to be honest with you, I cannot wait to do another one.
And Brad, when we record those 2, will everybody get them in the world, Brad?
No, just our Patreon pals. It's an exclusive. So if you want to hear Drunk Comic Lab, you've got to be a Patreon backer. And this is the time to do it. We picked up 9 new members last month. If we keep doing that, we could easily be doing Drunk Comic Lab by the summer.
I would love to do it, by the way, if we can record it at San Diego Comic-Con, because I think we'll be in the same space. That'll be so much better if we could pour one another one another's alcohol.
We'll be over there in that nice condo of yours, and you can have a nice glass of that peanut butter whiskey, and I can have some real stuff, and we just have a wonderful time.
Oh my goodness. All right. So everybody, patreon.com/comic lab is where you want to go. You're going to get every episode of Pro Tips, which is our exclusive Patreon show show. I think there's over 350 episodes now, Brad. Do I have that right?
Yes.
And so you would get all those previously hidden episodes unlocked for you. You'll get the Discord server. It's going to be a party. Come on over and join us. Patreon.com/Comic Lab. And Brad, I've got the question for you coming up right now from Comic Lab. This is from Nick. And Nick writes, "Hi, guys. Do you have any tips on working below your artistic skill level? A great example is what Chris Straub did with Chainsaw Suit, but I believe you've both done this as well to varying degrees. I realize logically that I can't be putting 100% of my artistic ability into every comic page because it will take forever to get anything done. But I also have this fear that if I simplify my style too much, it won't be enough to hook readers." Brad, what kind of answer do you have for Nick?
Well, I want to caution you against just assuming that drawing in a more minimalist style is the equivalent of using less artistic ability. I don't know that I think that's true. I don't think Chris Straub would consider Chainsaw Suit to be less than his artistic ability. In fact, what I found myself, when I do single panel comics, I draw in a much looser style. I draw in a much more minimalist style than I do for Evil Inc. And what I found is I don't necessarily draw any faster because, and I certainly don't draw with less of my artistic ability, because drawing with fewer lines, with fewer details, means that I have to think and strategize a whole lot more about where those lines are going.
Yes.
I'm using my full artistic ability, even though the drawing itself is a lot more simple and sparse. I'm still putting in 100% of my artistic ability. So the first thing that I've got to caution you is that I don't know that this is necessarily a concept that I sign off on, that drawing in a minimalist style or a more minimal style is using less of your artistic ability.
Yeah, and if I can reference a shitty human being here for a second. So Picasso, when in the later stages of his career, when he was drawing a bull with a single line, like a single continuous line drawing a bull, that was built off of decades of painting bulls, sketching bulls, illustrating bulls, sculpting bulls. Like, he had to explore the fullness of bull, and I know that sounds weird, in order to encapsulate it in a single line. And so, to Brad's point, it is not necessarily a lack of artistic skill to simplify. In some respects, it's actually a distillation and a concentration of artistic skill to simplify, because every line is weighted with so much more meaning and has to impart so much more. So now, listen, all that being said, does it sometimes take me far less time to draw one of my simplified cartoons versus, like, say, a creature with a ton of fur? Oh, my God, yes, absolutely. Yes. There's no argument. But it doesn't, to Brad's point, it doesn't necessarily mean a stepping down of my artistic abilities or intent. It just means a clear line, as the French might say. Yeah.
Now, as far as the rest of your question, where you're saying, well, I've got to find a style, basically, if I can reword your question, I need to find a style that I can do in a little bit more fast amount of time. I need to execute it more quickly, and it has to look good enough that I am capturing readers, right? I've got to find, in other words, it's not necessarily about artistic ability, but I've got to find a style that allows me to execute it quickly or more quickly, at the same time looking attractive enough that it captures and captivates my intended audience. Now, what advice do we have for him if we reword it that way?
That's interesting, because basically what you're looking for is repeatability with regularity, with a level of artistic flair, right? I mean, that's a different way of saying it. And I'll be honest, part of that is just, you got to draw more comics. I know that's a shitty answer. You don't want to hear that, but it kind of takes you a couple hundred comics until you go, oh, all right, I can see what the middle ground of repeatability is here, that also maintains quality, that also doesn't break the bank in terms of how much time you spend on it, which is key. So both Brad and I have had pages in our comics. Well, I can't speak for Brad, but I've had pages where I spent 16 hours on it, and I remember them clearly. I can point to them in a book and be like, I spent 2 working days working on that page. But then what's also interesting is you fast forward 3, 4, 5 years in my career, and I'll be honest, that same page I could have done in 4 or 5 hours. Like sometimes it's just the repeatability of what your hand and your mind and your skill set can do. So part of the unwillingness you have to sort of lower your artistic complication, the complication of your artistic expression is that you kind of haven't also produced enough comics yet. And so what's happening right now in your mind is that each one is a precious gem that you can't imagine going down in quality because each one of these is a precious gem. And by the way, that's totally natural. You're trying to prove yourself to yourself and to the world. Yes. So this is not an unnatural state to be in. But what I'm saying is increased time and increased comics will help steer you towards a willingness to slowly lower the bar, I guess, to what's acceptable, while at the same time your skill level will slowly raise the bar to what you can produce that's acceptable in a given amount of time.
I guess part of I agree with everything you said, but part of me also wants to caution against this idea. I mean, listen, we're all trying to find how we can do the best work in the most reasonable amount of time so that we can stay on a schedule. Right.
Yes,
right. That's something we're all trying to do to a certain extent. But I want to caution you against getting too wound up about this or too focused on it, because when that happens, especially in digital art, you start to very quickly make some shortcut mistakes or shortcut decisions that end up with kind of a bland looking page, right? And specifically, I'm talking about copy paste panels, right? And if you look at page after page after page, where all of your panels are what I call puppet show panels, right? Where you've got both characters and they're cropped at about the waist and they're both looking at each other and talking. And you've got that for panel after panel after panel, which is something that is often the result of copy and paste. Then yes, you're executing that page very, very quickly. You hit the mark. You did it quick. The only problem is those pages are fatiguing to read because it's the same image over and over and over again. And you're not, and you're also, if you're working in humor, there's a lot of humor is all about surprise. There's a lot that when you change the scene, you can add to that surprise and drive that humor home. And if you're focused on trying to get the page done quickly, and then you're going to miss those opportunities. So although I'll lead by saying that what you're talking about is what each of us grapples with, because of course we do. None of us can afford to have too many pages that Dave just described that take us 2 or 3 days to execute.
No,
right?
You sure can't.
We can't afford that. At some point, you got to say, I've got to do the art of the possible here. And I get that, but I also don't want you to get too focused on that, because then you'll start to make some decisions that you're going to look back on and say, I wished I had made different decisions.
In fact, Brad, it's funny you should say that, because the flip side of survivorship bias is in our 20s, if I named the cartoonist, Brad would know them immediately. Mm-hmm. We both knew a cartoonist who refused to draw anything that was less than the perfect page, and they would spend weeks on an update. Brad probably knows who it is. Mm-hmm. And here's the dirty little secret. They're not producing comics anymore.
No.
Because it can be a real mood killer in terms of your hand, in terms of your shoulder's ability to do it, in terms of your life being able to do it, and in terms of being able to make money on it. So you can go, in terms of survivorship bias, you can go too far the other way, where the quality level's too high. Yeah. And so let me bring in, there's sort of this old businessy truism, and it's not really a truism, but you'll get where I'm saying is there's a phrase that, like, you can have quality, you can have good prices, or you can have good service. Pick two, right? Like, you've seen a version of that statement in life, right? You can have all three of these, but you can only pick two. And a version of that is kind of true in comics. You can either have amazingly beautiful comics, or you can have regularity, or you can have time in the rest of your life, right? And so pick two. And what you come to find with time and increasing cartooning is that you can cheat the system and kind of have a little bit of all three. And that's the truth of it, is that yes, you're not drawing to the absolute 100% of your ability. Yes, your regularity is maybe not as high as it could be if you drew the simplest possible version. And yes, you have to make some sacrifices in your personal life. But if you do a little bit of all three, there's this middle zone that like you kind of can thread that needle, kind of. And that's what you find after 5 to 10 years of cartooning. It's like, oh, I can. You also choose your battles. So for Brad was saying before, there's puppet theater comics. Well, you can do a half page of puppet theater comics if previously you had a gorgeous splash page, right? Right. No reader will fault you for that. In fact, you look through any Marvel or DC book and it's a lot of that because you choose your battles on what panels are important to really put your art emphasis in. Same with writing emphasis. And so you have your sort of dips and valleys in quality, and that's okay because that mirrors how a reader will speed through some pages because it's just laying down exposition, and then they'll slow down on the splash pages to look. And so that's totally fine. And with time and increased execution in 5 to 10 years, you'll kind of see how you thread that needle.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Dave, I'm going to take us into our next question that came in from one of our Comic Lab backers, and it says this. I recently discovered drawing digitally after drawing and inking on Bristol board for 30 years. While I definitely have advantages now going digital, I find myself missing the things that go with traditional paper artwork, like having a collection of originals for sale for myself or to pass down to loved ones when I croak. Also, the whole aspect of collecting original art and seeing the hand-drawn mistakes and fixes that comes with part of the history of making comics. I'm curious if or how you struggled with these issues when you switched over to digital art.
Oh, well, okay. So I have a lot of thoughts about this because like Brad, I draw Drive digitally. Unlike Brad, I have intentionally kept Sheldon to be original art. Because much like this question asker, I still find such tremendous physical joy in putting ink on paper that I'll be honest, digital still doesn't give me. And also, not for nothing, Sheldon, depending on the year, can bring in between 5,000 and 15,000 sales of original art, and that's not nothing when you add that into the mix, you know. And so, I love the look and the feel and frankly the imperfections, because there are a lot of imperfections in original art in terms of what I can do with ink. So I still love it. But having said that, I want to dispel a couple of the parts of your question, because at one point you said, like, I will miss leaving original art to my loved ones. And this is where I think a little bit of experience of a couple of years can actually be helpful to you on this, because although maybe we're similar ages, I don't know. Having talked to Jenny Robb and Caitlin McGurk at Ohio State, who they're the conservators and museum directors at Ohio State's Library and Museum of Cartoon Art, and having worked myself as a conservator at the University of Kent of Canterbury, England, as a curator of comic art, and talking to other people like Farrago up in San Francisco, here's the dirty little secret about big comics collections when a cartoonist dies. The family doesn't often want it. Like, what are you going to do with mom's 40,000 comics that she produced over her life, or dad's 20,000 comics that like, what are you going to do? You'll want one or two that mean something to you that were kind of obliquely about the family dog, or you'll want one that was about the trip you as a family took to Yellowstone once, but you're not going to want the other 9,000, it's just ridiculous. So take that one off the page, because you will find that your loved ones want one or two comics. They're not going to want all 40,000 of them, right? As far as hand-drawn mistakes and fixes, that's fun. But it doesn't, I don't want that to be the reason why you stick with original art. You can be the type of digital art maker. They do exist that don't correct their digital mistakes. Like they when a line goes down, they stay with it. I can think of like a Kazu. We haven't had him on the show in a while, but Kazu, I remember, doesn't do a lot of layers because he forces himself to draw and paint over mistakes and fix what you know what I mean? And so in some respects, that actually creates a more concise editorial eye in the moment. Like, you're not allowed to fix things, or you are allowed to fix things, but you're not allowed to delete things. And that's an interesting choice digitally. Now, as far as what leaving original art entirely, what you can do, and what I constantly wish I could get my friend Brad to do, is draw your comic digitally, but still put out eBay pieces that are original art. I mean, I know for a fact Brad could make a couple $1,000s more every year if he did an eBay piece. For whatever reason, Brad makes his choices on that, and that's fine. You can speak to that, Brad, why you don't. But but what I'm saying is you can. No, I'm just saying you can.
I liked your tone. I liked your tone of voice on that. You can speak to that, Brad, if you don't. What do you have to say for yourself, Brad? You're leaving a couple $1,000s on the table. Any thoughts on that, Brad? Maybe you've got some thoughts. I just loved your tone of voice on that.
Oh shit! It was. You're right. It was very much. Well, like, Brad can eat a barrel of shit on that. That's fine.
Yeah. Maybe he's a big dummy, but well. But anyhow, finish your thought.
No. That was kind of it. It's actually been. It's been me talking too much. I would like to hear why Brad makes the choices that he does.
Well, I'll start from the end and work my way to the top. The reason I don't is time. Is that I could do that and possibly should do that. The only problem is I'd have to not do something else, and I'm kind of locked in time wise. So if I could fit that into my schedule, I would. And it is something that I would love to experiment with. It's just I haven't had the time. And I agree. I think Dave gives really good advice on that.
Well, let me share some advice that's not to Brad. This is not to Brad Geiger. This is to the world. When you produce an original piece of art that you can put on eBay, that scan can go up as a colored Patreon piece or as a thing in the back of a book. Not for Brad. This is not for Brad. This is for other people. So you can, like we always advise, make money on that piece of art multiple ways, having sold it on eBay. So again, not for Brad. This is for the world, not for Brad. But it's not a waste of time because you can use it multiple ways.
No, you're right. I'm making a note as we speak to see if I can get one out this month just as a proof of concept. How's that? But in greater.
Let me ask you this though, Brad. Do you miss physically drawing on paper?
No, not at all. Here's the thing that happened with me. As soon as I saw how much better my work could be digitally than it was analog, like how much the quality raised immediately. Not only my line quality, because, for example, let's just talk about the line. In doing analog pen and ink work, and certainly this is not you. Because we've been goofing around, I want to make sure you understand. Seriously not you. But there is a tendency with some people doing work with line that all of their lines are the same width, right? The line that describes the outside of the head is the same width as the line that describes the nose and the eyes, right? And we talked about that before. A dead line, a coloring book art, right? And working digitally is one really good way of moving past that. Because you can obviously get into the habit of using different line widths and so forth, and it's a lot easier to fix.
Right.
When I saw how much my line quality improved, how much more control I had over my image, how I right now draw 50% with the pen tool, 50% with the eraser tool. And how I'm sculpting the line much more than I'm drawing the line in some cases. When I saw it, just also at the end of the day, how much better my work looked when it was digital, I left originals and never looked back. I didn't miss them a bit, because for me, the thing that matters is that final image, and my digital art looks way better than my original art.
I will agree with that. I Drive is much the same path in that I'm going to give you the example I always use with Drive is a Starfield, right? I tried for 30 to 40 pages with Drive to do it as original art. And drawing a Starfield is one of the most maddeningly slow processes in ink. Like, you have a couple different ways you could do it. We could talk about the strategies of how to do a Starfield. But all of which to say is, if I wanted to put a galactic cloud in and among the stars, which is always a cool effect in a star field, like you could imagine a Star Trek scene of the Enterprise flying by, and there's sort of a galactic cloud in the background. A galactic cloud sort of gives you depth of field in a way that stars don't, right? And so it's a good thing to have in a star shot. It would take me getting out my airbrush set and it would have been a pain in the ass of I could have either had to do the toothbrush flick trick with some white ink. That wouldn't really have worked, by the way. I would have had to mask shit out with tape. That's no fun. Takes forever. So by the way, the comparison to that is I put it into Photoshop. I make a galactic cloud, put a star field in there, bada bing, bada boom. It's done in under 2 minutes. It looks stunning. It looks beautiful. It's unrecreatable. I mean, it's not unrecreatable, but it would take so much effort to do that in original art. So like Brad, when I have something where the art really matters, boy, howdy, is digital the way to do it. When it's Sheldon and it's sort of the joke of the day, it's fine that it's two talking heads and a pond and a tree in the background, because in a way, the joke is doing the heavy lifting. The art is not doing the heavy lifting. So all of which to say, Brad is 100% on task there.
The bottom line is, listen, you have to decide for yourself where this lands best for you, right? If original art is really that important to you, then you've got to find a way to make it work. If not, I would suggest maybe that from reading your question, it sounds like you're romanticizing it a lot. And I would ask you to maybe take a little bit more pragmatic stance. And ask yourself what's really important in this. And for me, that's the final image that you put in the book. But I hear a little bit of romanticism going on here, and I want you to kind of make a clear-headed decision.
Yeah. Can I make one more? And speaking of romanticism, because this is a version of what I said before, is there are cartoonists, and I've met them, who produce beautiful original art, but they will not sell the originals because they want them all to sit together in history. Yeah. And I just want to tell you as a friend, sell the original art. Let it go out and be enjoyed in the world. Because at the end of that road, I virtually guarantee 80 to 90% chance your family's not going to want it. It's going to end up in a museum drawer that one archivist will look at every 10 years or one historian will look at every 10 years. Sell it, give it away, let it go out into the world and be enjoyed. That's the purpose of that art, not to sit in a curator's drawer forever.
Yeah. Well, and just to put a cap on that, I've got a couple of pieces from my friend Dave Kellett, and they are among my most treasured art pieces. I love having original art from Dave. It's a nice thing to have, right? So let it go out there. Let your work be someone else's treasure, right? That they can enjoy. Get it out there. That's kind of the beauty of it is sending it out into the world.
And that's one of those things, much like our previous answer, it becomes easier with time. The more comics you make, the less precious they become. Yeah. And you're happy to send these out into the world to bring joy where they can,
And I'm happy that we can send this episode of Comic Lab out into the world for you. And that means I get to say that you've been listening to Comic Lab, the show about making comics and making a living from comics.
Your hosts have been my friend Brad Geiger, who makes so many wise decisions that who am I to question any of his calls on how he develops his career? He is wise beyond my years, and I think any criticism that I have is poorly landed. No, it's poorly landed is what I'm saying. I'm saying don't listen to me, listen to Brad Geiger, because he's the editor of webcomics.com, which is now also featured on Substack. Should I change that to say that now? Is that what we're saying?
I was since I'm still doing them both, I figured I'd do Webcomics Handbook on the top and then webcomics.com on the bottom.
See, gang, this is the level of professionalism that we talked about this before the show.
Oh, yeah.
Not
we
that
are
I'm doing
professionals.
it during the credits. That's right. Not what's happening. So I'm going to say he's the editor of webcomics.com, which can be found both at webcomics.com and on Substack. That's what I'm going to say. That's the way I'll say it. And he's the creator of Evil Link at evilcomic.com.
And my close personal friend Dave Kellett, the co-director of the comics documentary Stripped and the cartoonist of the pen and ink drawn Sheldon at sheldoncomics.com and the digitally drawn Drive, which is actually kind of tough to say, at drivecomic.com.
And the Comic Lab theme song is used with permission from Andy Creighton at theworldrecord.net. And this episode was edited digitally by Matt Woodard of Woodsong Productions over at www.woodsong.media.
If you love Comic Lab, you can rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts, and you may hear your review featured in a future episode like this one. This comes into us, Dave, through Patreon. It says, I'm just shy of 20 years of coming and going from webcomics and comics. For the last 9 years, I have had a career as a full-time artist. My time goes back to those early years you both reminisce about on the podcast. I remember you both at conventions in the early 2000s. So many times I have gone to the well to learn how to make comics. I've plotted the magnum opus, only to let it go. I've launched a few projects, only to have them fizzle out. But I can say that each one did go a little further than the last. You both have been here helping and pushing me along the way, so thank you. It is a joy to finally get up off my butt, get over this hump, and support the Comic Lab Patreon. Before I go, there's one more thing I have to share. During the pandemic, I used Patreon to deliver physical goods. Needless to say, it was every bit the mistake you always warn everyone about. Thanks again. Take care, Nick.
Hey, that's really nice, Nick. Thank you for that. That was really lovely put, and the sentiment behind it is absolutely heartwarming. Thank you, Nick. I will say, Nick, thanks to you, Comic Lab is made possible by your support at patreon.com/comiclab. So, gang, join us. Get us to 500. You're going to love those drunk Comic Lab episodes. And I will say that twice, patreon.com/comiclab. There was sort of the mid-show appearance of the spirit of Christmas past or Christmas future, I don't know, there, where I was like, no, Brad, you make your own choices. They're fine. Whatever you want is fine.
Well, I guess you're leaving about $1,000, maybe $2,000 on the table, but I'm sure you know what you're doing. Doing.
The children don't need to eat. What a friend. What a great friend.
Although you are right, I could easily turn that stuff into Patreon stuff. I am going to have to now sit down and think about how I'm going to do that.
Oh, no, don't know that I would feel guilty about it. Don't let me be a sticker on the podcast, force you to do anything.
Oh my God, that's right. I forgot about this. If I do it and somebody buys it for like a nickel, I get to say, hey, Dave, take a look at this nickel I just made with my art. Look at that nickel.
Well, that's why start small. Start with your favorite character, single one shot, no real background. And then, say you could, oh God, now listen to me trying to cage it so that you don't fail.
Stay tuned.
Yeah, exactly.